Good morning. Good morning, guys.
Morning,
Can you hear? Good. Baruch Hashem. Good morning, Reuven.
Boker Tov.
Good order.
Good morning, Rabbi.
Good morning. Good morning.
Let's see.
This is a security advisory. For your safety, please do not leave luggage unattended. Unattended luggage will be removed and
All right, here we go. Here we go. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Pesachim Daf Ayin. We just started the new Mishnah that speaks about Chagigas Yud Dalid, as we explained. And for the sake of clarity, every Yom Tov, aside of Pesach, aside of the Korban Pesach, we are obligated to bring Oilas Re'iyah, a korban, simply because we are seeing and being seen by God Almighty in the Beis HaMikdash. And an oila is a korban that's completely burnt on the Mizbeach. We also bring on every Yom Tov another korban called Shalmei Chagiga, Shlomim, which is part of the celebration of Yom Tov. Shlomim meaning it's a korban that we get to eat as well. And on top of the Shalmei Chagiga, which is just as much as an obligation as the Oilas Re'iyah, there is another korban called Shalmei Simcha. And it's good to remember this. Shalmei Simcha means that since there is a mitzvah in the Torah, v'samachta b'chagecha, which includes a joy that comes from eating meat, if a person has enough meat from their Shalmei Chagiga, then they're not obligated to bring a Shalmei Simcha because they already will have the Simcha from eating the meat of their korban. But if they already ran out of the meat of the Shalmei Chagiga, so there's another mitzvah to eat sacrificial meat throughout the entire Yom Tov, all 7 days. And when it comes to the holiday of Sukkot, as we'll see, all 8 days, according to Rashi, at least the night going into the 8th day of Shmini Atzeres, that's called the Shalmei Simcha. So having said that, and that's true for every Yom Tov, Oilas Re'iyah, Shalmei Chagiga, Shalmei Simcha, in addition, when it comes to Pesach, on Erev Pesach, we bring the Korban Pesach, and coming back to our topic, and we bring what we call the Chagigas Yud Dalid. Chagigas Yud Dalid is also, as we explained when we learned the Mishnah, it's not that we're obligated to bring another Korban Chagiga, it's Erev Yom Tov. But since that it's important to eat the Pesach al hasoiva, which means that we should eat it, and the eating of the Korban Pesach should make us feel satisfied. Being that there were many people pre-registered on every Korban Pesach, it was common that if we would only eat the meat from the Korban Pesach, there would not be enough meat to get everyone satisfied. So to make sure that Pesach is taka eaten ala soiva, in addition, we had an option, if needed, to bring the Chagige or the Chagiga of Yud Dalid, Chagiga of Arba Asar. We ate some of that korban, and then we didn't eat it all the way until we're satisfied. We concluded the meal by the Seder by having the mitzvah of the Korban Pesach. Now, it is regarding the Chagigas Yud Dalid that the Mishnah told us that we do not compare it to a Korban Pesach. In all of the 3 rules, it does not override, for example, Shabbos. And we're going to start learning on Daf Ayin another opinion, a Tana Ben Tema, who disagrees completely with the Tana of our Mishnah. Ben Tema will equate the Korban Chagigas Yud Dalid to the Korban Pesach, and we're going to find out on Amud Aleph to what degree does Ben Tema compare this, so to say, optional Chagigas Yud Dalid to the Korban Pesach. Not only will it override the Shabbos, but it's going to override Tumah and many other details. For example, in the Mishnah said explicitly that Chagigas Yud Dalid is like any urban Korban Shlamim that can be eaten for 2 days and 1 night. According to Ben Tema, who equates the Chagigas Yud Dalid with the Korban Pesach, According to him, you can only eat it like the Korban Pesach only that night. And by the way, just to make it clear that even though we quoted already the first Mishnah in Pesachim that says that really the night means the entire night. We eat the Korban Pesach until midnight, midrabanan, that's really subject to our machlokes tanoi. According to one Tana, biblically, the Korban Pesach needs to be consumed by Chatzois, by midnight. Now, we're going to have at the end of Daf Ayin, Ula's version of Rabbi Elazar, who says that this any voluntary shlamim that's brought on the 14th, a voluntary shlamim, we're not speaking about Chagigas Yudalid, cannot be used not for the Shalmei Simcha, nor for the Shalmei Chagiga. Now, the Shalmei Chagiga is an obligation to bring. That makes a lot of sense. And there's a rule, my friends, and that rule is that Kol Davar Shebachoiva Einoi Ba'a Ela Min HaChulin. If Hashem says we have to bring something, we cannot, so to say, kill two birds with one stone. Anyways, I already brought a shlamim, my optional shlamim. I made a pledge to bring a shlamim before Pesach, Erev Pesach, and I can eat it for 2 days. So I already have meat. That for sure is not going to be good. It's a optional shlamim, cannot be used for Shalmei Chagiga. The Chiddush of Ula's version of Rabbi Elazar is that even though when it comes to Shalmei Simcha, like we mentioned, it's really not a korban that you have to bring. It's simply about the obligation of eating kosher meat during Yom Tov, from which to derive Simcha. Dear Taka, one might have thought that even though you brought a shlamim for any other reason, Erev Yom Tov, and shlamim you get to eat for 2 days. So you have some of that meat on the 15th. Maybe that should be good also, at least to fulfill your mitzvah of Shalmei Simcha. So Rabbi Elazar is mechadesh that since the korban was slaughtered before Pesach, it's not going to be good, not even for Shalmei Simcha. Guys, we're going to unpackage this properly. We're going to go through all of these pratim as we start the sugya. We left off on Daf Samach Tesamad Beis, all the way at the end of the Amid, Mamish, on the last line, Amar Reb Ashi. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam sha'ar kol v'dvar. Says the Gemara, Amar Reb Ashi, Shma Mina from our Mishnah, that our Mishnah clearly, the Tanach of our Mishnah, does not equate Chagigas Yudalid to the Korban Pesach. It does not override Shabbos. It does not override Tumah. Actually, like the Mishnah says, it's so optional. It's just about you making sure that you eat the Pesach ala soiva, that if you have many people registered on one animal, very few people registered on a big animal, so there is enough meat to get everyone from going hungry to full satisfaction, then b'chal you don't bring it. So Amar Rav Ashi Shma Mina Chagiga Sarba Aser Daf Ayin on the top, according to our Mishnah, Lav Choyvehi. It's not a mandatory korban because the E Salkadaita Choyvehi. If it would be a mandatory korban, then Teisei b'Shabbos. Because as we have been learning that when the Torah uses the term Bimoy Adoi, when a korban has to be brought in its appointed time, and it's an obligation. If it would have been an obligation, then it should override the Shabbos. Likewise, if God would also command us, imagine, aside of everything we spoke on in the intro, aside of the Oilas Re'iyah, aside of the Shalmei Chagiga, aside of the Shalmei Simcha, if there would be another shlamim that we have to bring on Erev Pesach, then who cares if it's Meruba? No, it should not make a difference. Is the Chanaya that no, it's only to make sure that we eat the Pesach ala soiva. And likewise, V'teisei B'tuma. And like Toysvus, let's read the top Toysvus. Lav choyvehi koloimer. This is what Rav Ashi is extrapolating from the Tanach of our Mishnah. Ein chayiv min hatoyva lohavia, because the isal kadaita choyvehi min hatoyra is shuv ein lanu loimar sheyesh chiluk ben Shabbos l'choyl to have a korban hakavu leisman, and also v'teisa b'meruba and u'v'tuma elavadai. Right, the fourth line in Toysvus from the top. Lav choyvehi. And ve'enoi ba'a elo kedei sheyochal Pesach ala soiva. In other words, that the chagiga, this chagiga, simply to take the edge of the hunger away, to make sure that Pesach will be eaten until a person is fully satisfied. Now, let me ask you a question. We're going to hear this term again and again. Pesach ala soiva. Today, when we have the afikoimen, we have it at the end of the meal. Ala soiva. The afikoimen is in the place of the Pesach. Why do we have to have Pesach ala soiva? So Tosfos brings, let's keep on reading on Tosfos, the mashma, the Yerushalmi, that the Pesach Nechal ala Soiva is not a din d'oraisa. It's very interesting. It's a din d'Rabbanan. And why did Chazal say that Pesach should be eaten ala soiva? Gzeira mishum shviras etzem. It says explicitly that we're not allowed to break a bone of the Korban Pesach, and we're going to learn more details about that. It's what bone are we referring to, but a bone may not be broken. Now, she'im lo yehoisaba ala soiva, if a person would already not have resolved their initial hunger, mitoich shehu ra'av lechol habasar shesav v'atzamais hoyabala de shevirasim. If a person is very hungry and all I have is that meat, I don't have enough meat, then you're going to eat, and you're going to go and you're going to eat, you're going to chew it down to the bone, and then you might end up breaking the bone. So as a gzeira, for you not to break the bone, it's ideal for you not to feel such hunger. Now, interestingly, and if you don't have a chagigas yudalit, but there was enough of the Korban Pesach, I think people get satisfied with their eyes. It's when you look that what they serve to you on your plate is so much meat, you're calmer. And if they only give you a little piece, then you're gonna eat every bit of it to prevent you from breaking a bone. You have this concept that if there isn't enough of the Korban Pesach for all, then you bring in addition, like what we are calling chagigas yudalid. Now, says the Gemara, third line from the top, ubemuat miu maitamia asa. And why do we bring the chagigas yudalid if it's not an obligation, right? If there's not enough meat for everyone, kidatanya chagiga haba ma pesach nechelas tchila. As we just learned to Tosfos, the Riva bringing mashma from the Yerushalmi as to why is that. Okay, Gaval, two dots. Referring back to the Mishnah, our Tana holds lishi tosoi that chagigas yudalid is not like the Korban Pesach. That also finds expression that this chagiga is eaten for 2 days and 1 night, like almost all the other shlamim, like all the I'm saying almost because toida, which is a sub category in a shlamim, is only eaten for 1 day and 1 night. And we're going to learn later regarding other chagigos that are brought on Yontif. Certain Tanoim will also limit them to 1 day and 1 night. But anyways, our Mishnah makes it clear that chagigas yudalad is eaten for 2 days and 1 night. And that's very unlike the Pesach that's only eaten. Really, we say Pesach is for 1 day and 1 night. Be'emes, Pesach is not even for 1 day and 1 night, because Pesach may not be eaten only until it gets dark. And it's slaughtered during the day. You can't even begin to eat it during the day. You really only have a night. And again, there's a Tana that says that biblically you only have until midnight. Doesn't matter. We use the term Pesach is Yom V'Layla, and unlike this Chagigas Yudalet. So now that we clarified the sheet of the Mishnah, tells us the Gemara that there is one Tana that disagrees with everything that we just said. We should know that Masnisin the Loike Ben Tema. Ben Tema. The Tanya Ben Tema Oimer Chagiga Habama Pesach, which is Chagigas Yud Dalid. He is mamish. This carbon is exactly like a Pesach. And therefore, the Eina Nechelos Elo Liyoim V'Layla. Like we said, it's not really Yom V'Layla, but like the Pesach. So even though, normally a carbon, at least for 1 day and 1 night, it could be eaten. Like a Pesach, you can't even eat it during the day, only during the night. Another thing, however, says Ben Tema, that Chagigas Chamisha Asar, and we're speaking about Shalmei Chagiga, not yet Shalmei Simcha. I know in the beginning it's a lot of karbanis. We'll get used to it in a moment. That even Ben Tema's Maida, that's a bona fide carbon shlamim. That, yes, Necheles Lishnei Yomim V'Layla Echad. Invited in the Braisa. Chagigas Arba Asar, which is what Ben Tema is talking about, which is what our Mishnah is talking about. Yoitzeba Mishum Simcha, if you have enough left over that you're gonna be eating it, at least at night, and you're gonna have Simcha from eating meat, then as long as you have that meat, you don't have to bring yet another carbon to have a simchas, to have shalmei simcha. But ve'ein yotzeba mishum chagiga. But since there is an obligation to bring an oilas re'iyah and a shalmei chagiga, and these are obligation karbanos, and we have a rule that kol davar shebachayva, whenever you have an obligation, you can only fulfill your obligation by taking something that was otherwise not sanctified chulin. Masha'en kain, the shalmei simcha that we're going to learn about later. Like we mentioned, the Shalmei Simcha is not that Hashem is commanding us to bring 3 karbanos. No. Oila, yeah. We have to bring a Shalmei, Chagiga. You're obligated to bring. Shalmei Simcha means that there is an obligation to eat sacrificial meat, which will bring you joy throughout the entire yontif. And any type of sacrificial meat that you anyways have will be good. Now there's a nuance. When we speak about any other sacrificial meat that you have anyways, is also okay for you to fulfill your obligation of having shalmei simcha. As we mentioned, many opine that's only if it was slaughtered on Yom Tov. That was only if it was slaughtered on Yom Tov. And if I have my nidava shlamim slaughtered erev Yom Tov, then we will see Ula holds that Rabbi Lazar holds you can't fulfill your obligation. But that's just a nuance in these details. Well, let's focus on that later as we will. But coming back over here, the point of this brisa is that our Mishnah, the hemshich to the first Mishnah, all of the unique characteristics of a Pesach, and the Mishnah contrasts that that's not the case with Chagigas Yudalid. You should know Ben Tema disagrees with all of it. Ben Tema equates Chagigas Yudalid with the Pesach. Now, my Talmud the Ben Tema, what's the source? Says the Gemara, Kedutani Rav, like Rav taught to his son Chia, based on a pasuk that we have in Parshas Kisisa, it says over there, Yolin, La Boiker, Zebach, Chaga Pesach, and you shall not leave over the offering of the festival of Pesach until morning. Now the pshat is we're speaking about the Korban Pesach, that the Korban Pesach has to be eaten at night. No, says that this Tana, and as Rav taught it, that if that would be the only thing that Hashem would have been speaking about, the words Zevach, Chag are extra. Hashem could have communicated the same mamish by writing V'loyolin laboiker haPesach. V'loyolin laboiker. The Pesach has to be eaten at night. Zevach Chag is also alluding to Chagiga. And what Chagiga, guys? Not the Chagiga we call Shalmei Chagiga. No. The Chagiga that's brought on the 14th with the Pesach. The word HaPesach is Kemashmoi. And since the Torah together commands V'loyolin, so V'loyolin means it should not be overnighted. So not like it says in the last line of our Mishnah, Daf Samach Tes Amud Beis, that V'nechelish l'shnei yom v'layla echad. No, that since the pasuk in Kisava is being merames, it's alluding to the Chagigas Yudalid, they both share the same end time, which is, again, either the morning or according to those who hold that the Pesach biblically has to be consumed by midnight, it's going to have the same laws of a Pesach. Now, there are many other laws of a Pesach that Ben Tema did not explicitly speak about in this Braisa. And what we're going to have until almost the bottom of the Amid is we're going to try to discover how much do we equate them. It's very simple. Says the Gemara.
Quick question.
Yes.
Can you just clarify for me which Chagiga are we referring to here? Is this the Chagiga that you have to bring every Yom Tov?
No,
the Arba Asar one?
Very good. I don't mind repeating this, guys, because I know when I learned this the first time, it's confusing. What we are having right now, Avremel, is Erev Pesach, 2 karbanis. Pesach, Chagigas Yud Daled, which is what we're learning about. And according to our Tanach, Chagigas Yud Daled is not an obligation. That was Ravashi today. If you're not going to have enough meat of the Pesach for everyone to become satisfied, bring. That's Ben Tema says, no, you're obligated to bring a Chagiga. Aside of that, and I got just to hazard this, it's good to remember this. And what I'm saying now is not only for Pesach, it's for every Yom Tov. There are 2 or 3 karbanis. I'm saying 2 or 3 because the third is not like the first 2. Oilas re'iyah. There's a mitzvah to go and to be seen and to see in the Beis HaMikdash. Together with that, we have to bring a carbon oilah, completely burnt on the Mizbeach. Carbon number 1. Another obligatory carbon is called a Shalmei Chagiga. That's not what we're talking about. Everyone holds Shalmei Chagiga, which is brought on the 15th, is an obligation. Now, parenthetically, so there's many details, that if a person forgot to bring the Shalmei Chagiga or did not bring the Shalmei Chagiga, you can compensate for it. Right? They make tashlumim. Remember, shvuos, they make tashlumim goes until you, that's to compensate, but ideally you bring it on the 15th. And now we just spoke about, in the beginning, we're going to learn a lot about it. There's a third carbon, which is called Shalmei Simcha. Shalmei Simcha is not exactly an obligation. Shalmei Simcha is not an obligation for you to offer. Shalmei Simcha is an obligation for you to eat sacrificial meat, not stam meat, kosher meat. How are you going to get kosher meat? Well, if you have kosher meat, you're yoitza. If you don't have, bring another shlamim. Shalmei Simcha is for the whole 7 days. Shalmei Chagiga is once. If you don't bring it on the first day, you have tashlumin. You can compensate. Shalmei Simcha means throughout the Yom Tiv, Hashem wants us to have joy from eating kosher meat. Okay, let's go back. Now, they asked in the yeshiva, according to this opinion, not like our Mishnah, according to the Tema, how much do we equate it to the Pesach? Necheles tzali, does it have to be eaten roasted dafka, which is a unique law by the Koren Pesach, or no? Or ein necheles tzali? In other words, explaining the question. Ki akshay asked when they made a hekesh, right? They made this comparison that ki akshay rachmana lePesach. Is it only Lelina? Because the pasuk in Kisavai, I'm sorry, right? In the pasuk in Kisisa, I look at Danny, I think Kisavai. The pasuk in Kisisa is V'lo. The pasuk speaks about overnighting. Aval etzli loi, or maybe no. So the Gemara says, I have clear. Tashema, we're quoting here from a Mishnah we're going to have later in Pesachim. It says, Halayla hazeh kulay tzali. Everything is roasted. What does that mean? Everything is roasted. Kulay. And that you should know this Mishnah that we're going to have in Avri Pesachim is actually the words of Ben Taimah, because the words kulay tzali is obviously speaking something beyond the Pesach. It's not right, tzali. Why kulay? That means that even if there's another carbon, tzali. Now, our Mishnah doesn't hold that way. Our Mishnah does not equate the Chagigas Yud Dalid with the Pesach. So, and that's Ben Taimah. So, Shema Mina, that this equation isn't only regarding overnighting, which is limiting the time you have to eat the Chagigas Yud Dalid, but it's also the way you prepare it. Bite it. Ibaylu Ben Taimah. Ba'a min habakar, oy, eino ba'a min atzoin, I'm sorry, ba'a min habakar, oy, eino ba'a min habakar. Could it come also from cattle? Like our Mishnah wrote again on Daf Samach Tesamud Beis, it can come from tzoin, it can come from bakar. Carbon Pesach cannot come from bakar, right? It can only come from flocks. It can only come from sheep and goats. So another question: Bamin Hanakevos, could it also be a female animal, as any shlamim? By any shlamim, we're not. It doesn't make a difference whether it's smaller animals, whether it's larger animals, whether it's male animals, when it's female animals. By Pesach, it has to be male. By Pesach, it has to be within the first year. We'll see all the details. Bamin Hanakevos, or Yena Bamin Hanakevos. A third question: Bas Shtei Shanim, can it come even in its second year from when it was born? Or Yena Bas Shtei Shanim. And again, the Gemara clarifies the question. Ki Ache Nachmana LePesach, perhaps, even though we know from the Mishnah that it's not only about the Layalim, but at least it's Lemidei Da'achila, it's regarding matters of eating, regarding matters of consumption, which is roasting, which is how you prepare it and the time of eating it. Avalachal mili, but all the other three questions, which is not directly achila related, loy, oy dilma sta, loy shma. So again, Tashma, we clarify. It says in a Braisa that Chagiga haba ma Pesach, harei hi ke Pesach. And look at the words of this Braisa. And this Braisa obviously is not the Chachamim. It has to be Ben Taimah. Ba min atzoin ve'eno ba min abakar. Ba min azcharim ve'eno ba min anakevos. The first white line. Ba dafka bashanasa, in the animal's first year. Ve'eno ba bashtei shanim. And now what we already learned clearly from Ben Taimah, ve'eno nacheles elo l'yoyim v'layla. And as we clarified from the Mishnah later in Kuf Tezayin, ve'eno nacheles elo tzli. And now we're adding another Gavaldik detail that they didn't even ask about. Another unique law that we have by Pesach, that everyone has to be pre-registered for that carbon before they do the shechita. Same thing by Chagigas Yudalit, only lebentema. So now says the Gemara, end of quote, end of Raisa. So says the Gemara, it's clear. Man shamat le the islay high svara. All of the above is bentema. So shema mina that kula milsa be'inan, indeed. Shema mino, Gavaldik. All right. So now we think it sounds like we covered it all. No, we didn't. There's one more detail regarding the Pesach that they still ask in the yeshiva, and we'll see in a moment why this is a standalone question. The final inquiry.
According to Ben Tema, they were only eating lamb the night of Pesach. No flesh, no chicken, just lamb. That's it.
Lamb or goats, Danny? Lamb or goats?
So got it. Goats.
Not cattle, not cows or oxen. Okay. Even, and by the way, even if the cow is still a gola, it's not even a, what do you call them? No, a young cow.
No veal.
No veal. Very good. Do we have this unique prohibition of not being allowed to break the bone? Now hold on. By now that we had this last Braisa, why would we think that it's different now that we said it's mamish the same? I'll tell you why. The Gemara explains. that the Chi'akshe Rachmana LePesach, I know that to try to make this comparison from the pasuk in Kisisa, V'layolin Laboiker Zevachag. Zevachag means the Chagigas Yudalut. But since the Torah writes regarding the prohibition of breaking a bone, the Torah writes the words boy. It says ve'etzem loisishberu would have been enough. No, it says in boy, we just read this last Shabbos, ve'etzem loisishberu boy. So boy v'loy b'chagiga. Or I know that there's a word boy, and there's something that we have to learn from it, but maybe it means only b'kasher and not b'pasalu da'asa. In other words, if a Pesach became invalidated, then there's no issur in breaking a bone. Maybe that's what the boy is coming to teach. So that is the final question. And weiter, Tashema. Here we're quoting a Mishnah. Let's get ready for the next Masechta. We're already up to Dafayin. The next Masechta is Shkolim. It says Gavaldik. Sakin shenim says ba'arba asa. If you in Yerushalayim find a knife, now Bachlal, when you find a utensil, when we are being cautious with the halachas of tum and tahara, it's important to at least be suspicious. Maybe that utensil became tamei, which is fine. Toivel it. But the rule is that the fear that we have is that a keli normally is tamei on the level of a rishon. So you don't have to wait 7 days. You have to toivel it, but then you have to wait until the night. So the question is, if you find a knife on the 14th, if you would normally apply this rule, to be machmer, toivel it and wait until tomorrow, that means that that knife may not be used for the shechita of the Korban Pesach. And if you remember just a couple of pages ago with that whole story with Hillel, that many, you need a lot of knives. If you're shechting 1,200,000 just Pesach. Now we learned this Chagigas Yudalad. You understand what type of operation the Kohanim were doing? You need a lot of chalavim. So the Mishnah writes that a sakin that you find on the 14th, you can shecht right away. I want to read the Rashi for this whole sugya. So keep one finger in the Gemara and one finger in Rashi. Shoichat ba, it's a little bit above. Pischai miyad, Rashi teaches beautiful. The ein tzarach adbila, zehamoitzi, the one who finds it doesn't have to toivel it. Why? Because the mistama, hid bilua be'oleha, its owner, even if it became tamei, he toiveled it when? Yesterday. Why would everyone toivel their knives on the 13th? Head of Shemesh, and it should be already good for the 14th. Keep your finger in Ashi. However, back inside, we're quoting here this Mishnah and Shkolim. But if you find a knife b'shleisha asar, then taka shoyna umatko. Shoyna means you repeat. Not that you know for sure that it was toiveled, but Rashi says kulaymer afal pisha safek shemehit bilu abalim. Maybe if we're saying that all utensils that were used for the shechita were toiveled on the 13th, so maybe it was toiveled and then it was lost. Maybe not. Maybe the person lost it before he toiveled it. So Zeh, the guy who finds it, Shoino Matbil, I'm reading inside Rashi Misafik. Shem Adayin Leit Bilur. Shoyalehem Shuz Bayim Matbila. Some people procrastinate, sadly. So Mela, 13th toivel. Keep your finger in Rashi. However, kupitz, if you find a cleaver, now Rashi teaches. A cleaver, says Rashi, is a very large knife. Look at the Ruban. Ruban were not used for shechita. Most of these cleavers were used to cut meat, to break bones. But sometimes this kupitz, this cleaver was good for a chalef, for a shechita knife. This is very important. So now you can still keep your finger in Ashi. If you find a kupitz, bein bozeh, whether you find it on the 13th, even if you find it on the 14th, says the Mishnah, toivel umatbil. You have to toivel it. Why do you have to toivel it? It's amazing. Because since a cleaver, Rashi says, was primarily used to cut bones, and what are we using these utensils for? Erev Pesach, for the Korban Pesach. And on the Korban Pesach, we may not break the bones. So even if the owner was going to want to have this knife, this kupitz, this cleaver, kashet for Yom Tiv, but he would not be using it on the 14th, which would allow him to toivel it on the 14th. It should be good for the 15th. So if you find it on the 14th, let's read inside the Rashi. Shoyno umatbul, 2 lines before the end of the narrow lines in Rashi. Therefore, ein haba olam tzricham lo kol arba asarat lamachar v'yesh loymar. Perhaps loyit bila, the first line under the Gemara in Rashi, because now, truth, he was going to travel on the 14th to use it on the 15th to have it to cut bones of your shlamim that you're going to eat. But again, the 14th is like the 13th. That's the end of Mishnah. Now the Gemara begins with the Gavaldic proof. L'cha'ira says the Gemara Mani, who is the author of this Mishnah in Shkolim? It can be our Chachamim. Why? Because Mishnah Sakin, the Matbol, the Chazil Pesach. We learned our Mishnah, there is something called Chagigas Yudalid. Our Mishnah holds Chagigas Yudalid doesn't share the same restrictions of a Pesach. L'chachamim, for sure, Chagigas Yudalid is like any other Chagiga, and you can break the bones. And people brought Chagigas Yudalid. So Kupitz Nami Hochazil Chagiga. And if the owner, who before he lost it, knew that it's Tameh, he would travel it on the 13th. So l'chayr, it must be that our Mishnah is Ben Tema. And another detail, and it must be that according to Ben Tema, in other words, that even the Chagigas Yudalid may not have its bones broken. So even if the owner of the Kupitz knows it's Tameh and he'll want to use it for the 15th, for the Shalmei Chagiga, for the Shalmei Simcha, but he's only going to need it on the 15th, which allows him to travel it on the 14th. So therefore, it must be Ben Tema, and that's an ayam, that it's completely equated. Now, the Gemara is going to push back on that. That lav dafka, I can learn the Mishnah and Shkolim even according to the Chachamim, and we're going to get very creative. Says the Gemara loy, meaning lav dafka, I can say lo'olam, the Mishnah and Shkolim follows the Rabbanan. And the Rabbanan allow you to use a cleaver to break the bones of the Shalmei Yudalit. But the Mishnah in Chagiga is speaking about the case where Erev, the 14th, is on Shabbos. And the Mishnah, Lishitasai, the Chachamim who do not equate Chagigas Yudala to Pesach, they hold that Pesach overrides Shabbos. Chagigas Yudala does not override Shabbos. So again, even though if you would have shechted Chagigas Yudala, you can use the Kupitz, in the case where it's on Shabbos, you don't need it for the 14th. Says Gemara, no, that doesn't fit. That's not going to work. Aside of technical questions, if you find it on Shabbos, I'm saying myself, how would you even carry it? Take that all out of the way. It says clearly, look in the Mishnah in Shkolim. Always context. It always clarifies. V'hamid the Kani safe over there in Shkolim that if Chal Arba Asaliyas b'Shabbos, which that's it. Before you read further, you see that everything written until this line is not speaking about when the 14th is on Shabbos. But let's finish reading the Mishnah. That what shoichet b'miyad, that then you can shecht with it immediately. Now, why is that? Chavra, look inside the Rashi. In the wide line, 7 lines before the bottom of the Amid, says Rashi, that's why Rashi said in the beginning that a cleaver was primarily used to break the bones and to chop up the whole animal. But the koipitz was not like today. There, the koipitz was also like a chalaf. And if you ran out of chalavim, you had a koipitz. Why? Miyad, says Rashi, the afal gav again, Shema ba'olam hoylehem sakan lishchait. Maybe the owner was not planning to use it to shecht. And again, like we're mentioning, and today we're not going to have to break any bones. Why won't we have to break any bones? Again, we're saying that the Mishnah follows the Chachamim. According to the Chachamim, right, even though you can break the bones of Chagigas Yudalid, but you don't have a Chagigas Yudalid, so again, why can you use it? Rashi says Gavaldik. People will need to use this kupitz on the 15th and on the 16th. They'll have to use it later. So therefore, anyone who has a keli, that's tamei, based on the rabbinic rule that we keep on learning, that you may not toivel kelim on Shabbos, right? Because you're being misaken the keli, that's a rabbinic, because it's not, the tumah is not discernible, so your fixing is not discernible, but midrabanan, you may not toivel kelim on Shabbos. So everyone will toivel it Erev Shabbos, which is on the 13th, back inside. So if the 14th is on Shabbos, you can shecht miyad, and a chanami, you don't need it to break the bones, but because tomorrow is Yontiv, you want to use it for Yontiv, you know you can't toivel it on Shabbos, so you have to toivel it on Friday. And then, because if it became tummy, it was toiveled, it was already overnighted. Another detail in the Mishnah, that whenever you find a cleaver, kupitz, that is bound to a knife, to a chalif, then it's also like the chalif. It's just like we learned that if you find the sakin on the 14th, you can presume that even if it became tummy, the owner toiveled it on the 13th, the owner would never tie a keli that was already toiveled with another utensil that was not toiveled. Okay, end of Nukuda. Now, all we prove from over here is that since the Mishnah continues that if Chal Arba Asad Liyos B'Shabbos, etc., Michlal, that the opening part of the Mishnah in Shkolim is Lav B'Shabbos Haskinan. So L'chayre, we're back to our proof that this Mishnah must be Ben Tema, right? Because according to the Rabbanon, the kupit should be just as tohered as the sakin, because people will use the kupits on the 14th for Chagigas Yudalid, which L'Rabbanon could be broken. So the Gemara says again, Lav Davka. Maybe the Mishnah goes according to the Chachamim. And the reason why even if you find the kupits on the 14th, you can't use it, ve'ela, because when do the Chachamim say you b'chlal bring a Chagigas Yudalid? Only if the meat of the Pesach is little for every pre-registered person. So ala soiva, bring another korban. But what happens is elo sheba daf ayin amid beis b'meruba. If there is a lot of the Pesach, according to the Chachamim, Chagigas Yudalid is b'chlal not a obligation to bring. So there's no need for it. So the owner, even if the owner of the skupitz would know that it's tamei, when the owner has pre-registered people, few people on his big fat lamb, so then he doesn't need the kupitz. So the Gemara counters. That doesn't make sense because mino yadi. That's a beautiful question. That's a beautiful Jewish question. I'll tell you why, because that's the way it's going to be. Mashiach is coming. Even if we have our group and we pre-registered for an animal, what happens if at the last second another group of Yidden will run into the Beis Hamikdash the last second, and there'll be such people, and they have no animal? What do you think we're going to do? Tell them we're going to invite them in. We're going to share our food with them. Elamad's just going to mean that there'll be less for each one of us. So what? But we're giving another Jew an opportunity to do a mitzvah. In other words, a Jew was never certain that we never closed the group. We never closed reservations. Shechita closes the pre-registration. But up until then, there can be more people. Mina yada. Beautiful. And the Gemara says, you know what? I'll give you another comeback. The Mishnah goes according to the Chachamim. The only time that the Mishnah writes that if you find a cleaver on the 14th, you have to presume it's tamei is because Shabbat betuma. If the Korban Pesach is being brought betuma, then there's no need to toivel the kalim. Now, why would the Korban Pesach be brought betuma? What are we talking about? No, we're speaking about a scenario that if you found it on the 13th, right, then you're speaking about a case where already on the 13th, there was Tumah, because if there wasn't Roif Tzibur Tamei on the 13th, you don't know on the 13th what's going to happen on the 14th. So the Gemara says, no, it's possible that even on the 13th, you will know that tomorrow the Pesach will be brought to Tumah. When will that be? The Meis Nasi. That when the leader of the Jewish people passes away, all of the Jewish people are obligated to mourn for him, and including in that, they are obligated to go to the funeral. Whoever goes to the funeral becomes Tamei b'Tamei Meis. So the Nasi passed away. Let's just tweak that. The Meis Nasi Amos, exactly when did that happen? If he passed away on the 13th, then don't forget, the Mishnah and Shkolim is contrasting the knife to the cleaver. If that's the case, then even the knives are going to be tummy. Don't forget that the Mishnah wrote that the knife is presumed tahar. The Mishnah is clearly saying, so it must be Ella the Meis Ba'arba Asr. The Nasi passed away on the 14th. But when did your utensils become tummy? It became tummy on the 13th. You toiveled your knife on the 13th. Why would you not toivel the cleaver? The Nasi didn't pass away yet. You look at this logic over here, answers the Gemara again. All of this is just to point out that you can't prove from this Mishnah, Shitas Ben Tema, regarding breaking bones in the Chagigas Yudalid. This Mishnah can be the Chachamim. Now, the case would be, listen to this, the Nasi is Goises B'Shloisha Asr. It's the 13th. The Nasi is at the end of his life. People, by the laws of nature, are saying he's not going to live until tomorrow. Now, but he might live. He still might live. So, Sakin, Dechat, Sveika, Matbala. Wow. There's only one doubt. What's the one doubt? Maybe the Nasi will pass away tomorrow, and everyone will be Tamei, and then we'll bring Pesach Batuma, and then I don't care if the knife is Tamei, but maybe he won't. Maybe he won't. Whenever a person has one doubt, they always err on the side of caution. That's human nature. Maybe yeah, maybe not. However, when it comes to the kupits, for people to use the kupits, there's two doubts if it's going to be used. If you want to use the words of statistics, so the percent is much lower. But whenever, let's use the words of Chazal, whenever there's a double doubt, people give a lot less credence if it's a double doubt. Today's fake olaymat, what's the double doubt? Number one, like we mentioned, maybe the Nasi will pass away, maybe he won't. And we go further. Even if the Nasi will pass away, even if the Nasi will not pass away, but maybe there's going to be a few people on a big animal. No, it's Bachlal, maybe we won't need the 14th. According to the Chachamim, you don't have to bring Chagigas Yudalit. So the whole carbon is only a maybe. And the moment you added another maybe, then they're not going to toivel it. Gewaldig. And indeed, so what did we conclude? That you cannot bring any proof from the Mishnah and Shkolim. Okay, weiter. So where are we up to? Beautiful. Our Mishnah, Chagigas Yud Dalid is not like the Pesach at all. Not an obligation. You don't bring it on Shabbos. You don't bring it if you don't need it. There's enough meat from the Pesach. Shitas ben Tema in the opposite side. It's equated to, from the Pasuk and Parshas Ki Sisa to a Pesach. It's a Chiyuv. You bring it on Shabbos. You bring it Betuma. And then we had our final doubt. Okay. Now let's listen to the story. Tanya, we learned in a Braisa. Yehuda, the son of Doir Ta'i, him and his son separated themselves from the rest of the Jewish people 1 year. We'll see in a moment why. What does it mean? So Perish, who, and his son Durtai Benoi, that was named after the Zayda. Whether the Zayda was still alive or not, that depends whether they were Ashkenazim or Sephardim. And where did they go? They went to the south. What does it mean they went to the south? So number one, if a person lives within a certain proximity of Yerushalayim, and we're going to learn exactly the distance soon, then the person is mechuyev to go bring a Pesach Rishon, and if not, the person is chayiv kodesh. Really, there's another obligation, like we mentioned today. There's an obligation of Aliyah L'regel. For you to exempt yourself from the obligation of Aliyah L'regel, aside of Koren Pesach, it's not enough for you to live the 50 mil or beyond outside Yerushalayim. You have to be outside Eretz Yisrael. According to many, the V'yashav Lo B'dara means that he took his son and he went to a place where he has no obligation not to do Aliyah L'regel. He didn't want to bring the Koren Pesach. Why? Listen to this. Because he said, this is what Yehuda said, that Im Yavay Elyahu. This happened after the Churban Abayis. After the Churban, he said, that if Elyahu Navi is going to come, Mashiach is going to come, and we're going to bring our Koren Pesach. But that year, the 14th was on Shabbos, like on Tafshei Pei Aleph. And he knew that the Yidden are not going to bring the Chagigas Yudalid, because he knew that the Chachamim Ben Tema, we're going to follow the majority. Yehuda wasn't convinced that the Chachamim are right. So he knew that the Yidden are not going to bring Chagigas Yudalid. And then he was afraid that Elyahu Navi is going to come and ask us, why didn't you bring the Chagiga? So what are they going to respond to him? And he knew what they were going to respond. They were going to respond that Timaheni al Shnei Gedolei Hador Shmai V'Avtalion Sheim Chachamim Gedolim V'Darshanim Gedolim V'Lo Yomru Lem LiYisrael Chagiga Doichas Shabbos. And Shmai and Avtalion Taka did not say that Chagiga is Doichas Shabbos. It's just that Yehuda, he held like Ben Tema. He held the Chagiga has to be brought on Shabbos. So he was afraid that we're going to do it wrong, and he didn't want to get the criticism of Elyahu Navi. So what did he do? He walked away. So Amarav, my Tama the Ben Dortoi. Now it's beautiful because what we had today on Amud Aleph, we had the source of Ben Tema from the Pasuk and Parshas Kisisa. But obviously, Rav did not have that Braisa with the source. So here we have another reason, another source from which we would and we equate Chagigas Yudalid with the Pesach. What does it say? This is a pasuk in a. The Chsiv says V'zovachto Pesach Lashem Alikachot Soinu Bakar. You know what the beautiful thing of learning all this, aside of the Ikir, we're getting closer to Hashem, is that you learn Dinim and then comes again Chitas, or people go to Shul. You're going to read a pasuk and you're going to have these bomb questions, right? What's the rule that we are learning? Pesach, right, Danny, does not come from Bakar. No veil. Pesach has to come in Atzoin. Yeah, you can bring either lamb or a goat, but it has to come from flocks and not from cattle. Look at this pasuk. V'zovachta Pesach l'Hashem lekech Atzoin uBakar. I'm sure many people get stuck. Most of us, okay, I don't know, like many other things, they go weiter. But if it really bothers you, you'll get stuck here. So Rav says, tell me what the meaning of that. It doesn't work. That's the answer. Like Ben Tema, Elatzoin goes to Pesach. And Bakar must be referring to the Chagiga of the 14th. Guys, not that the Chagiga of the 14th must come from Bakar. It must not. It can also come from Bakar. So here you have again that the Torah puts together the Pesach and Chagiga Sudalid. And the Amar Achmana v'Zovachta Pesach. No, the Torah, right, makes this equivalence between the two. And therefore, going back to one of the three of our Mishnah, Yehuda, Ben Dortoi, and his son, like Ben Pema, they hold that if Erev Pesach is on Shabbos, not only does Pesach override Shabbos, right? V'Zovachta Pesach, the Chagigas Yudalid overrides the Shabbos as well. So now we already have on today's daf two sources for that, right? A big hero, so he went away. Amar Ravashi, Ravashi was upset that people were trying to explain the source, the reason of Yehuda ben Dortoi. He says that the Anan, Tama, the Perusha, Neku, Nifroish. The word Perushim, just to know, a parush sometimes is a complementary word referring to people that are very observant and they are removed from the others. Even though Hasidim advocated that we should not be Perushim, we should be observant, but we should be connected to others. But here the word Perushim in the Gemara is used in a derogatory way. Rav Ashi is saying you have to Yidden, that they were close enough to bring the Korban Pesach, and they removed themselves. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to give a reason to them. They're wrong. But hold on, if this opinion is wrong, so you have to explain the pasuk in the Pesach Lashem Bakar. How do you learn that? How do our Chachamim learn that? So El Ravashi says, I'll tell you how to learn that. Another din. A residual Pesach. This is the classical residual Pesach that we're going to bring a carbon. Mashiach is coming. We're going to designate a carbon. I just want to know in whose backyard will that carbon hang out? That's a good question, right? We'll make a goydel. So it's going to be, you'll be the zoicha begoydel. What you think you know how to control an animal. We're going to wake up one morning, a day or two before Pesach, and the animal not here. What are we going to do? You're going to go searching for the animal? No, we're going to get another animal. That's something that happened very often. Now, the first animal was designated already. We're going to find another, we're going to bring the new animal, and then the original animal, they call this the Murphy's Law. He'll come back the next day. What do you do with that animal? That's called Moisar Pesach. If you have another, we learned this in Kachim, another common phenomenon, that when people designated Karbanos, they already had an experience from last time that they had an animal and they lost the animal, then they had stress. I don't want to stress. You have to bring a carbon. Many people designated from the outset too. And they said, one of the two I'm going to bring. Well, insurance policy. And then you bring one. And then what do you do with the other one? So the rule is, Moisar Pesach should be brought for a shlamim. This gives us a better appreciation to many halachas we learned not that long ago, right? That if you bring a Pesach, right? It becomes a shlamim. That's the din. B'chlal it should become a shlamim. Now, where do we know that from? I get it, it's holy, but maybe make it into a oila. I don't know. Why does it have to be a oila? It can also be a donated carbon. So that's the source, says Rav Nachman. Shenemar from the pasuk in A, when it says V'zovachta Pesach L'Shem Lekechet Tzoinu Bakar, and here's the bomb question: V'chi Pesach min Bakar ba? That's one of the primary rules of Pesach. No, V'haloi ein Pesach ba elo either min hakavasim or min ha'izim, but not from cattle. Elo, that's the Torah. Moisar Pesach should be brought lidavar haba'a min atzoinu min habakar. It should be brought for a carbon type in which God was the least particular in. And you know what that is? That's a shlamim, because the shlamim can be brought from a male animal, from a female animal. A shlamim can be brought from tzaka, from tzoin, or from bakar. So that's the remez, what you should use Moisar Pesach for. And with this, we conclude the Shita of Ben Tema. Now, let's come back to the beginning of the topic. And guys, we learned this with God's help correctly, that we were focusing until now on Chagigas Yudalid. And we said that Chagigas Yudalid, according to the Chachamim, it's not a chayva, it's only to eat Pesach ala soiva, and it's not doiche Shabbos. It happens to be that the Gemara knows that our Chachamim don't only hold that Chagigas Yudalid is not Doiche Shabbos, it's not like a Pesach. They also hold that any Chagiga is not Doiche Shabbos. That means, oh, here we go, Yaakov, the Chagiga, now we're going to start, the Oilas Re'iyah, and the Chagiga, and the Shalmei Chagiga. The Shalmei Chagiga, if the first day of Pesach is on Shabbos, is also not broad. Is not broad. Now, why would they say that? So that's the new topic. Says the Gemara, V'Rabbanan, my Tama Loidachi Shabbos, why will the Shalmei Chagiga not override Shabbos? Havadai Korban Sibur, it's like a Korban Sibur. Now again, it's not a Korban Sibur like a Korban Tamid. So Rashi 7 lines before the bottom of the Amid makes that clear. Vafilu Chagigas Chamisha Aser, that's Shitas Chachamim. Chagigas Yudalid is only to make sure you eat the Pesach to your satisfaction. And if you have enough meat from the Pesach, you don't have to bring it. Chagigas Tezvav or Shalmei Chagiga, one is mechuyev to bring. You're obligated to bring it. Now, who's obligated to bring it? Again, it's not one for all, but every group would bring enough of these animals so their group should have additional meat. So the Rashi just explains that any carbon type that's brought en masse, it's brought by everyone, not one per person, but one per group, like a Pesach is sometimes called a carbon sibur. And we have a klal that any carbon sibur that has a designated time for it to be brought, it overrules the Shabbos. So back in the Gemara. So V'Rabbanan my Tama L'Dachi Shabbos Avadi carbon sibur. So answers the Gemara, Amar Rabbi La'a, in the name of Rabbi Huda ben Safra, Amar Kro, recording a pasuk from Parshas Emoid, V'Chagoisem Oisoi Chag Lashem. Guys, this pasuk is speaking about the Yom Tiv of Sukkos. And when it says that we should celebrate, we should bring a chagiga on Sukkos, Shivas Yomim Bashana, right? 7 days in the year. This is a real problem because we know that there is a chagiga that is brought on Sukkos that has to be consumed for 8 days in the year. And as we're going to see right now, don't forget that Sukkos, like Pesach, biblically is a 7-day Yom Tiv, but unlike Pesach, Pesach comes to an end on Shvi Yishol Pesach. And even though many people consider Shavuos like the Shmini Atzeres, but it comes 7 weeks later. What's unique by Pesach is Ubayom HaShmini, that right after Sukkot, the next day is Yom Tov. And there is a Korban Chagiga that is not for 7 days. Chagiga is for 8 days. So the Braisa is asking, how can it say in Emor that the Chagoisam Oisoi, celebrate means bring a Chagiga for 7 days? Shiva, Frek the Gemara, Shmoina Havem. Answers the Gemara, Ella, that is the source that Chagiga she'eino doichas haShabbos. So therefore, you will never have a Chagiga, a Shalmei Chagiga, brought, sacrificed for 8 days. You'll never have it sacrificed because from 8 days, 1 day is going to be Shabbos. So hold on. The problem is going to be, well, if that's the case, then it's only for 6 days. The Gemara is going to ask it right away. So Kiyasa Rav and Amar, well, if that's the, and that is the source. Now, if a Korban Chagiga will be Doiche Shabbos, and again, based on the given that the Korban Chagiga on Sukkos is to be eaten, not only on the 7 days, but also on Shmini Atzeres, then the Torah cannot write 7 days, Araya, that not on Shabbos. So Kiyasa Ravin came from the Holy Land, Amar, he says, that Omarti Lifnei Rabboisai, Pa'amim, She'iyata Moitze Ela Shisha, that I asked from my teachers over there, hold on, now that we established this rule that a Chagiga does not override the Shabbos, so then the Torah should not write 7 days, right? The Torah writes 7 days categorically, it's not true. Because what happens if the first day of Shabbos? Let me explain the question. It's very important. Shlamim can be eaten for 2 days. Forget about Chagigas Yudalid Lebentema. Let's put that aside. Now we're focusing on the Oilas Riyah's birth. Shalmei Chagiga is a normal shlamim. It's eaten for 2 days. Even following the shita that we're quoting here, that you may not slaughter the Chagiga on Shabbos. Let's say Shabbos is the 3rd day of Sukkot, just for example. You slaughter a Chagiga on Friday, but you can eat the meat on Friday and on Shabbos. No, it's the fact that you cannot slaughter it on Shabbos wasn't the question of Rav. Rav could have asked, and every week, in any 7 days, one day is Shabbos. No, his question is that when are you allowed to eat and to fulfill your obligation of Shalmei Chagiga, even if you didn't slaughter the meat today, if this animal was slaughtered on the holiday of Sukkot? So that will work, but there's one problem, that in the case where the first day of Sukkot, Shabbos was Shabbos, so then what? No one is, you're going to shecht it on the Erev. That's not called Shalmei Chagiga. Shalmei Chagiga, like Oilas Re'iyah, has to be brought on Yom Tov. So how, if you're telling him that if Chagiga overrules Shabbos is good, then you have 7 days, but then the problem is you have to have it for 8 days. But now that you're telling me this rule that you can't shecht it on Yom Tov, how can the Torah categorically write the Chagoysim Oisel Hashem Shivas Yomim when the first day will be on Shabbos, the first time you're going to have Shalmei Chagiga will be already the second day of Sukkot. Now you only have 6 days. So Amar Abaya, who heard this question, was so upset at this question. These are very sharp words. Ovin, tragically, was childless. So he says that Ovin, Tichla, the childless Ovin, is making us a childless statement. Only like someone like him can make such a statement. He says, there'll never be 8 days because you never bring it on Shabbos. And since most of the years, other than the case where the first day of Yom Tov falls out on Shabbos, there are 7 days, it should not bother us that the Torah makes a statement. Not every statement has to be categorically so. If you remember, we had an Eiduvin, right? The whole concept that there's always exceptions. Whenever there's a rule, there's an exception. The Torah can case 7 days. It didn't bother him at all. Okay, let's move on, guys. We have a few more minutes. I want to open up the new topic. It's all connected. Now, there is a Amoira Rebbe Elazar, and we're going to have a machloikis, what exactly he said. Today, we're going to start Ula's version of what the Rabbi Elazar says. So, Amar Olam Rebbe Elazar, if you have a Shlomim, now we're moving on. Again, forget about Shalmei Yudalit. That we finished. Now we're focusing on the 2 Shlomims that are brought on Yom Tov, and not to confuse them. You have what we call the Shalmei Chagiga, which is an obligation on us to bring. And like we mentioned, if I bring it today and I have enough meat for today and to tomorrow, I don't have to bring it tomorrow. Shalmei. Then there is a mitzvah every day on Yom Tov to eat sacrificial meat. And that's called Shalmei Simcha. So says Ulam, the name of Rabbi Elazar, Shlomim, whether it is in the category of Shalmei Chagiga, whether it is in the category of Shalmei Simcha, if they were slaughtered on Erev Yom Tov, and they can be eaten for 2 days, so you'll have some of their meat on the 15th, Eina Yoitza Bahen, not for Simcha and not for Chagiga, and he explains himself. Why will you not fulfill Simcha? We mentioned that Shalmei Simcha is not an obligation to bring. It's an obligation for you to eat sacrificial meat. So who cares if this animal was slaughtered yesterday? It's sacrificial meat and I'm eating it on Yom Tov. Oh, you're right. But everything has to be based on a pasuk. So here he quotes a pasuk in Parshas Ki Savoy. It says, V'zovachta, let me read out the whole verse. It says really, V'zovachta shlomim, v'achalta sham, that's the whole verse written out. So there's a juxtaposition of V'zovachta and V'samachta. This V'samachta is Shalmei Simcha. So says the Gemara, V'zovachta, V'samachta, meaning Ba'inon Zevicha, Daf Ein Aleph on the top, B'sha'a Simcha. And it's not just for you to eat it and have Simcha, but the shechting of the Shalmei Simcha has to be done on Yom Tov. Now, the other statement of Ula, Amar Rebbe Elazar, is a lot easier to explain. Mishum Chagiga, the Shalmei Chagiga for sure cannot be fulfilled by any carbon that was brought on the 14th, because there is an obligation to bring Shalmei Chagiga. Mamish, like there is an obligation to bring Oilas Re'iyah. And no, we cannot kill 2 birds with the same stone. And therefore, Shalmei Chagiga is a davar shebachayva. You are obligated to bring it. And the rule is that the chol davar shebachayva einoi ba elam in acholin. Beautiful. Now let's hop another few lines. Maybe this is an Amayra. Maybe we can prove that this Ula Amar Rebbe Elazar is correct. Leime Misayele from the following brayso. It says in Parshas Re'ei Ve'ha Yisa Ach Sameach. And everyone shrais in the shul. Ve'ha Yisa Ach Sameach. It's good to know the meaning. What does it mean Ach Sameach? It means this what we're Shalmei Simcha. That's what it refers to. Now, when it says you should be ach sameach, it's adding something. It's coming to teach you that this concept of shalmei simcha is not only during the 7 days of Sukkot, but it also on the Yom Tov of Shmini Atzeres. According to Rashi, it's also in the night of Shmini Atzeres. L'rabos leila Yom Tov for achrin l'simcha. Now, let me ask you something. Can you say that this additional ach sameach is to add that you have to have shalmei simcha on the first night of Yom Tov? Well, if you were to say that, no korbanos can be slaughtered that night. If we would be obligated to have shalmei simcha in the first night of Yom Tov, what would that mean? That korban has to be slaughtered erev Yom Tov. That would go against Ula Amar Rabbi Lazar, that says that any korban that was slaughtered before Yom Tov cannot be used for neither chagiga. Oh, so the Brisa is saying that rabbis leili Yom Tov ha'achrin l'simcha. Then the Brisa says, Ato Omer leili Yom Tov ha'achrin, that you're mechuyev to have the shalmei simcha even in the night going into Shmini Atzeres. Maybe oy eni ela leili Yom Tov Rishon, and that would mean that you shechted on the 14th, and that would be against Ula Amar Rabbi Lazar. But the Brisa says no. Since the Torah uses the words ach means but it's not just a type of the word ach is chilik. Ach is limiting. Limiting means that God is saying something, but He wants us to know that we should not apply it always. We should limit where we apply it. And the logic says that whenever you have to choose where to apply it and where not, we apply it where it makes more sense for it to be applied, where less novelty is needed for you to apply it. Nukuda. Now, why is it less novelty? So explains the Gemara. And my Tama is it not because of the rule of Ula Amar Rabbi Lazar. Lav mishum te'ein lebamei yismach. You can't. You based on the rule of Ula, you can't. If you shecht, you can shecht it out of Yom Tov, but it's not going to be good. So therefore, you have to apply it to the night of Shmini Atzeres. So that should be a proof to Ula Amar Rabbi Lazar. Says the Gemara, like we're not arguing with Ula. This is not a proof because maybe can the Tani time read the Brisa. The Brisa writes, Maru Isla Rabbis Leila Yom Tov Achroin, Ula Hitzi Leila Yom Tov Rishon. I mean, ach is you have to apply it to one place and you have to exclude it from the other place. Mar Bani Leila Yom Tov Achroin Sheyesh Simcha Lefanav. In other words, since the other days on every day of Sukkot we have to rejoice by eating sacrificial meat. So when you are already obligated to do something and God is telling you add it for one more night, it's relatively not considered a big addition. You are in it anyways, keep on doing it. Initiating is much harder. But maybe Eula's wrong. Maybe you could shechter on the 14th, but this would mean that you are beginning it earlier. Initiating is harder than continuing. So there's no raya, but we're leaving off with this rule of Amar Ula, Amar Rabbi Lazar, that any shlamim that's brought erev Yom Tiv, even though you have leftover meat and you're going to have simcha by eating it, you will not fulfill your obligation of Shalmei Chagiga, you won't even fulfill your obligation of Shalmei Simcha to be continued. Good? Easy. We have to remember these rules. Have a great day. Until tomorrow morning, 6 o'clock.